We are live. How's it going, everybody? It's Wardy here in our latest live edition of Big Mets Updates. We have plenty to get into. The Mets have met with Roki Sasaki as of today, per Andy Martino there of SNY. We're going to deep dive all the latest on Sasaki and the Mets front and their chances of landing the coveted MPB Southpaw. From there, we're going to get into all the latest as well, a little bit more on the signing yesterday there that we saw, and everyone's favorite starter said nobody there, and Griffin Canning. We'll shed some light on that move, along with what is next for the Mets this offseason, as there are a plethora of things to get into there still as we break down the latest with Alex Bregman. Could the Mets be willing to go north of $200+ million for Bregman? A day ago, I would have said no, and today there's a bit more question marks in the air on that front, per Jeff Passan of ESPN, that we're going to highlight from his latest piece today. From there, we're also going to get into the latest on Polar Bear Pete Alonso. Why is his market so cold right now? When can we expect it to heat up? As well as Corbin Burnes and the entire pitching market. What are the Mets' current vision for the pitching market? When can we expect moves of significance, of a greater magnitude there than Griffin Canning? Everything and then some is what we're about to highlight in tonight's show, everybody. And yes, I will be accompanied right around 20 minutes or so from now, not even, with our guy James Shiano, good friend of mine and another talking head in this Mets space. James, who is very pitcher savvy as well. He'll be breaking down his thoughts on the Mets starting pitching targets, potentially reliever targets, Sasaki, everything there is to know there, his initial reaction to the Juan Soto news, and everything in between. So rest assured, folks, we got you covered, and I'm very excited because an hour before our live show is set to get going here tonight, we find out the news on Roki Sasaki. So we're going to begin there with Roki, and some of these things we're going to rehash once James comes in the show, but I want to first talk to you about it with each and every one of you, my initial reactions, and then we'll go from there. But let's first get a roll call going to everyone chiming in live on a replay. Thank you guys so much for taking the time, and thank you guys so much as well for now helping us get to not even 600 subs away from 30,000 on the platform. That is why we are the #1 platform covering the Mets on YouTube, not directly affiliated with the team or a major network itself. It's all thanks to each and every one of you amazing Mets fans. Thank you guys for the support there. It is beyond appreciated always. Yoshima with $2 holla, thank you so much. Give me Roki Soto. Trust me, I want it just as much as you do. Madeline, Merry Christmas to you and yours as well. T-Mac, great member, happy to have you in. Or Corey, my man. Cameron Kier with the $5 holla. Thank you, Cameron. Let's see what a Mets and Dodgers are doing. Will force MLB to adopt a hard cap. Likely won't be a season 2027. I wholeheartedly disagree, Cameron. I appreciate the donation. I don't think we're going to get to a full lockout status in 2027, but it is interesting to evaluate the long-term future as we get into the next level of negotiations there between the players union there and the owners itself. Happy to have you in here. Nick from Jersey, how you doing? Always, how you doing? Wally, John Cape, great member. Jesse, how you doing? Andres, Josh, great member, how are you? Truman Quinn, how you doing? Jesse, John, how you doing? Revolution, MH, Nada, how you doing? Richard saying Yasista, that's hilarious. Thank you for coming in. How you doing? Going up the list here, Brennan, how are you going up here? Jordy, great member. Darren, great member. Spawn, great member. Alberto, Tito, Soto, the best name out there, baby. How are you? We got Frank, we got Dan, we got G-Men, who's a great member. We got Noda, we got Jimmy, we got Michael. We also got another Brennan. We got ourselves another Corey. We got ourselves, what we're going up here, Fletch, great member. Leo, Michael, let's get to that last name, Michael, and Brando Fino, I love that. Vegas Jets, Michael Levinson, Jordy, great member, if I didn't say him already. Thank you guys, come one, come all. I appreciate you all, and please know that if I do not get to your comments right away, or if I don't get to your comment or question at all throughout the show, it is not personal. We're going to have hundreds to then thousands of people that watch us between live and on replay, so naturally I'm not going to be able to get to every comment, and I sincerely apologize for that. But please know it's in good reason, because we have a lot of breakdown Mets land, and we don't have much time to waste, so let's deep dive and get right into it. But before we talk about Roki Sasaki, before I tell you guys a little bit later about our amazing sponsor at BetUS that has you covered with all your sports betting needs, let's hear the $20 holla from my guy Tio. Tio, thank you so much for the $20 holla. Tio, I wish you were my Tio. All jokes aside, thank you so much for the donation. Thank you for always giving us Mets news. I was your 42nd sub, and I'm still here. You rock, Wardy. Tio, you rock, my man. That is so sick to hear that as well. My goodness gracious. You've been here since the 42nd official subscriber on the platform. We're going back to, again, that's the beginning. That's December 2020. That's how long ago that is, when we did our first video, which was on the Mets signing Trevor May. full circle. We've had Trevor May on the platform over the past year, which was really cool. But that's bananas. Thank you so much for the donation. Happy to have you here as a longtime follower. You're an absolute beauty, my man. Thank you, thank you. But all right, guys, and Mike, I'm so sorry to hear that regarding you and your family. My condolences to everyone involved. That is terrible news to hear. I will be thinking and praying for you and your family tonight, Mike. Seriously, I'm very sorry to hear that, but thank you so much for chiming in. Really do appreciate it. Okay, guys, let's get into the big news, and let's start with the one that's very fresh. Again, this just happened over the past hour at the time of recording this, so there's no better time to talk about it than right here, right now. Josh, amazing. We'll talk about Sasaki as well. Doesn't care if it's East or West. Yep, we're going to get into all that here on a second regarding Mr. Roki Sasaki. But yes, guys, Andy Martino initially reported earlier today that the Mets did, in fact, meet with the Japanese phenom in Roki Sasaki today. And that there are a lot of reasons as to why this is exciting from a Mets fan point of view, but the obvious one is, one, what do we know to this point? David Stearns met with Sasaki's camp going back to, I believe, September. We also know that reportedly over the past week and a half or so, Roki Sasaki's and his team, led by the agent and Joel Wolf, the same agent who represents Kodai Senga, so we have a nice familiarity there, they were on record stating, especially just Sasaki's camp in general, how much they admire and how much they look up to the Mets pitching lab with Jeremy Hefner, now Desi Druskull, and everything that they're doing from Port St. Lucie up. There are a lot of things that honestly go in the Mets' favor of landing Sasaki. The main thing that goes against them is the fact that they're an East Coast team, and they aren't the LA Dodgers or the San Diego Padres. They don't have the pull that you would have with a Shohei Ohtani, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, or a Yu Darvish to a degree, but what they certainly do have is a Kodai Senga, a veteran countryman who could help him get settled at the MLB level, especially in a big market and how to handle the media, because Sasaki's openly been noted from his agent there in Joe Wolf to not being able to handle the media well whatsoever at the MPB level, and I think a lot of factors go into that, but the main one being he's only 22, 23 years of age. He's dealing with a very gruesome media there in the Nippon Pro Baseball League based in Japan, where if you are one of those players that wants to leave the MPB very prematurely to the magnitude of numerous years before you're actually even able to really opt out and leave, it's going to ruffle feathers and you're going to hurt in aspects of the culture that they have there. So I'm not shocked to hear that the media gave him such a hard time. It's unfortunate to hear him not handle the media well, and that's why there's been some speculation that potentially a smaller market organization could be best for Roki Sasaki, at least to begin his career, knowing that he wouldn't be in a spotlight and have to deal with the media aspect. But then in follow-up questions over this past week to Joel Wolf, his agent himself, people have asked, what are the thought process behind him saying handling New York? And he said, I firmly believe that he would be able to handle that. And again, not that Sasaki is opposed to, say, going to the East Coast or going to certain areas, but it's the fact that his agent went out of his way to make a note that, yes, what we have dealt with to this point in the media aspect of things has not been good for Sasaki or his mental health, and that's something that he has had to deal with. How is he going to be able to overcome that, along with, obviously, the language barrier and everything else that entails going to a country that you never played in before consistently outside the World Baseball Classic there that we saw in Miami from Roki Sasaki a year and a half ago? Now we have him here there at the States for the foreseeable future. So as we get into Roki Sasaki and why this is very exciting for the Mets is because there were many fans for a long period of time, including myself to a degree, that were under the impression that the Mets were not going to be able to land Roki Sasaki at all, that they were not going to find. Many sources are reporting Alonso back to the Mets very soon. I have not seen one credible source to suggest such a thing. Funny enough, I've actually heard quite the contrary from Jeff Passan today himself. And if there's anything that I know about Jeff Passan, is that he's more credible and reliable than any other source that would more than likely be referenced in our conversation right now. So we will get to Alonso. We have plenty to discuss on him, but to suggest that anything is imminent or close, especially his potential reunion to the Mets, is far from it publicly that we know to this point. But to reel back in on Sasaki, everybody, this is a man, as you see from the numbers down below, has been nothing short of filthy, absolutely dominant there at the MPB level. And I'm excited to pick the brain of James Shiano in the next 10 minutes or so to really break down what he loves so much about Roki and his potential. But he's an anomaly of a player as a guy that fits a short and long-term bill, even to a higher degree than what we saw in Yoshinobu Yamamoto at the age of 25. This guy's 3 years younger. He has so much upside. On top of it all, he is very, very crafty. This is, and I actually do apologize. I said earlier, everybody, Roki Sasaki, the coveted southpaw. If I did say that, I apologize. Roki is a right-hander. I know that. I don't know why I said southpaw earlier. Maybe just because I was thinking of other lefties of recent and the free agent market, including the Samoan southpaw himself and Sean Manaea. But no less, Roki, just absurd numbers that we've seen. The guy has won the Triple Crown essentially already there at the MPB level for being the best pitcher, essentially being the Cy Young Award equivalent there over in the MPB at such a young age. Yes, he dealt with velocity fluctuation throughout the course of the year, and that went in hand with ailment. Also, Sasaki at a young age is really just trying to figure out how much he has in his arsenal right now and how much he can bounce, because he is not far removed from starting his professional career, so he has a lot more learning to do. That is why a team with an advancement in the so-called pitching lab, like what the Mets have, can certainly benefit Sasaki and getting the best out of him in his young player development. That paired with an inevitable six-man rotation that the Mets will be doing next season, that David Stern said it himself already, with Kodai Senga, there are, again, a lot of boxes that the Mets check off. The biggest one that they don't check off is what was a pre-existing belief that Sasaki is feeling like a favorite to land with the Dodgers based on the endless connections there, and or the San Diego Padres because of his long-lasting relationship with one Yu Darvish, who is like twice the age of his, but they could pitch together potentially for the next 3-4 years, because Yu has at least 3 more years on his contract at the age of 38. I'm pretty sure he's not a free agent there until we see what? Until 42, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, Alex, thank you so much for getting the hype going with the likes and the subscriptions. It really does mean a lot. Thank you guys in advance for helping us get to, if we could get to anywhere from 350 plus likes at the end of the live show to or north of 1,000 viewers, that'd be greatly appreciated. So thank you guys so much for smashing those buttons. It really does mean a lot. And thank you guys in general just for taking the time. We're going to talk more on Nolan Arenado, everybody. Don't you guys worry. We're going to expand on that plenty here with James shortly. But I just want to know the initial reaction to the Roki Sasaki news for each and every one of you. What I would love to see spam in the live chat right now is simply this: do you think the Mets have a legit chance to land Roki Sasaki? David Stearns was on public record throughout the winter meeting stating that it'll not be for a lack of effort. The Mets are going to give it their best shot, but they are not viewing Roki Sasaki as an end-all be-all. They have to view him as someone where if they can land him, awesome, that's essentially a luxury, but they can't operate in the offseason mindset that he's a boom or bust, because if they do, then they will miss out on other key free agents out there that's separate from the spending that you would spend on Roki Sasaki, because one is in the international free agent signing pool where you only have anywhere from $7 to $10 million, and you can reach $10+ million in money to allocate for Sasaki at absolute most if you are able to get a suitor willing to trade some of their bonus pool money, because teams are willing to trade north of 60% of said dollars. So for example, the Mets right now, who currently sit $7-8 million that they have that they could offer straight up a Roki Sasaki on a multi-year deal, that could become north of $10+ million if they can find a suitor that's willing to trade away some of that pool money. Not that I think that would make much of a difference in Sasaki's decision, but it's just something to bear in mind. You have to wonder if they're going to ponder it before he makes his decision there as we get to January 15th or so. Sports Media with a $5 haul. Thank you so much, everybody. Trade Marte, Blackburn, Beatty, Carson Bench to the Astros for Valdez, Ronel Blanco. I don't know. I just want those two on the Mets. Ronel Blanco, I have concerns as to how he'll project a bit. Yes, he was very exciting last year for sure. Another guy that's boded well in the Astros pitching lab, like no-nos on his resume, as is the case with Valdez, but I don't see that trade making really any sense at all for the Astros. Not much. Carson Bench I can understand to a degree. Brett Beatty I can understand to a degree, but they're likely going to have a better third base option. I will say, though, Beatty going to Houston would be a vibe for a guy that is a Texas native. That would be pretty cool if something along those lines would happen. But Marte and Blackburn are certainly assets that they're not necessarily looking for. It's an interesting proposal, I'll give you that, but it's not one that I really see the Astros doing, because I don't think they get enough on the return for the future versus what is kind of washed now, and the Martes and the Blackburns to a degree, when you know exactly what you're getting. You know, if you're the Astros and you have to put yourself in their shoes, why would they want to go out of their way to trade Valdez and Blanco for a return that's only giving them one guaranteed, semi-top prospect in the organization and another now has-been prospect that's just trying to figure himself out at the MLB level? I can see pessimism in a proposed deal like that, but it's an interesting one no less, so thank you so much for the donation. But speaking of Sasaki, everybody, continue to let me know in the chat if you guys do believe that the Mets have a legit chance at landing him or not. That'd be awesome. Before we bring in James here, as he will be joining in the next 5 minutes or so, let's highlight some other key topics just to at least touch on briefly before we expand further here in just a couple minutes. And one of the topics, and DMAC, thank you so much for the $5 donation. DMAC says, considering the need for development, are we getting too excited about possible Sasaki impact in 2025? Realistically, where would we slot in as a 5? It all depends on how much his arm is willing to handle and can adjust at the MLB level. Sasaki could easily become as good as a number 3 for the Mets next season, while he also could find himself more as a number 5, number 6, because he only pitches, say, 100 innings next year. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have certainty as to how much usage Sasaki would get with this team in year 1, but naturally they would try to exacerbate all options possible and get out there on the mound as soon as possible. But they're going to make sure that they don't rush it and hurt everything about his player development. That is, in fact, true. DMAC, thank you for that donation. But guys, we did see a key piece that came out from Jeff Passan today. That's going to go in hand with a lot of what we're going to discuss here with James, as well as a plethora of other topics. But as we get to this bullet point here from Passan, we're going to highlight this, and this actually shot mesmerized for the initial bullet point here. I checked out the article after I saw this, and it all holds true, so you don't have to worry about anything being inaccurate there. And the article from Jeff Passan initially states the following that you guys can see right here. The teams are hesitant to give Pete Alonso a long-term deal, but see great value in adding him for the next few years. Mets remain involved. Some key quotes that I found from that in particular that really stood out to me, everybody, are the following. So listen up to this. Pete is in a tough spot, one National League executive said, and I quote, "There doesn't seem to be a big market for him because of his defense, and with so many first basemen out there, nobody's in a rush to overpay any of them." That is true. Again, as much as we love Alonso, he is at best an average defender, at absolute best. He's not a good base runner at all. He is not a guy that gives you consistent high contact hitting. He is your prototypical 4 hitter that's going to give you 40 plus bombs a year. He's a slugger, genuine through and through. That's what Alonso is. Alonso isn't anything more than that, nor is he anything less than that. And I think because of the fact that he had such an underwhelming regular season, that still hurt his stock in the free agent market. I think the Mets, after offering what we saw at 7 years, north of 160 million, now again it's further validated why they offered it then versus what Alonso is not only looking but hoping to get. Obviously, Alonso wants a contract north of $200 million, but there's a route right now where that just simply is not looking likely whatsoever. And the Mets are looking to be creative in a situation like this, especially for Pete. So much so in the circumstance where an industry source, per Jeff Passan, speculated that Alonso could sign a 5-year deal worth between $125 million to $140 million to return the Mets, with an opt-out clause after the first and or second year of the deal, giving him an opportunity to test free agency again should he have a massive year next year. Less pressure on his shoulders as well, because it doesn't mean that he needs to opt out. It's just something that he can do, and if he balls out in another contract year, then okay, that's best for him. And for the Mets, if he opts out, then the Mets can heavily consider Vladimir Guerrero Jr. next offseason as well. So again, I know that a lot of us would love to see the polar bear back with the Mets, as do I, but the reason why we're not going to find out anything on Alonso probably until after the big holiday is simply because of what the current market is telling us. He doesn't have a big of a market that you'd hope for. It's pretty few and far in between at the moment. There's pessimism that the Astros are willing to spend and go what are the demands of one in Alonso, as is the case with some other teams. Chicago Cubs as well. Are they going to be willing to shell out the dough? I'd see more pessimism there at the moment. So it's going to be a fun one to evaluate for sure. I think there are things continuing to favor the Mets in bringing back the polar bear, and they can do it in a scenario where there are opt-outs involved. That would be the best scenario for both sides, especially if those opt-outs are more player opt-out, especially. Again, Alonso, 45 home runs, 110 plus RBIs next year, and we're looking at a WRC plus of at least 135, hopefully north of 140 or so. That alone would get him a better payday because it would show more consistency with him, and the Mets have a deep playoff run and he's a part of it positively. That too would be a fantastic thing. But because of the fact that there's still so much uncertainty in his current market, I'm not going to go on and speculate too much on the potential of opt-outs, because that is something that, again, that may not in fact be apparent at all by the time his contract is presented, whether the Mets bring him back or he goes elsewhere on a, say, 4-5+ year deal. Alonso on a 5-year deal I think would be perfect. Opt-outs I find appealing, but it's not something I think is an end-all be-all thing necessarily, depending on the team that you're talking to and the circumstance that they would have Alonso for. But we have more that we have to touch on because Starling Marte, as we talked about a couple days ago, he is available for trade. That was initially reported there from Pat Ragazzo and then reaffirmed with our buddies on the channel as well, and Will Salmon of The Athletic over the past number of days. And the Mets are looking at pitching depth and will try to sign an impact arm later in free agency as the markets develop. So just as we've all speculated and noted, the Mets are playing the long game with Sean Manaea, Walker Buehler, Nick Pivetta and stuff because they know they can. They know that the markets there aren't as hot as maybe you initially think. Should things heat up and say the Mets lose out on all of them, then we'll have the discussion then. But as things currently stand, it's not so much about them losing out as it is just playing the market smartly, the David Stearns way, and having guys essentially fall in your lap because of how scarce their markets are and knowing that they're not getting the payday that they initially looked for. That is how you strategically spend and not mindlessly spend or not blindly spend the way that, to an extent, Steve Cohen did with James McCann and then among some others there in the first 2 years as Mets owner. But guys, we're going to touch on more of these notes here in a second, but let's do it all now with our guy in James Shiano. Let's bring James in. Okay, James, do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Do you hear me?
I hear you. Long time no see, brother. How's everything been?
Dude, really good. I'm happy. The last, I feel like 2 or 3 times I came on with you, we had a stream issue with me. So I'm happy we have this figured out and we're ready to go.
Yeah, a lot of it was honestly more so my issue than anything else. So the stream platform that I use, there's this little button to mute the desktop audio. My big problem is that when I'd bring in callers, I wouldn't mute the desktop audio, and for whatever reason, it would cause this robotic effect where the listeners would hear it like doubled essentially. So they're like, what is going on? So I got that figured out. We should be locked and loaded. And if not, then clearly I'm just the biggest jinx imaginable. But I'm really happy to have you on because last time we spoke, James, was, throughout the heart of the season actually on the platform, I believe. So now a lot's changed since then from the 2024 Mets to what the 2025 Mets are going to be. And we have a plethora of topics I'm excited to get into with you. But let's just start with the big one still, because you and I haven't talked one-on-one about this. The initial Juan Soto reaction, where were you? What were you doing? And secondly, how are you feeling now a couple weeks prior after this is now kind of marinated and start to set in?
Where was I? I was sitting exactly where I am now, but on the other side of my desk where I just sit most of the time. And I was just simply refreshing Twitter, like I'm sure everybody was. I was watching you and Mark on the stream, and it just happened. Heyman tweeted it, and I kind of just I fell down. I hit the deck. I couldn't really believe it was happening. I made an Instagram story. I started tweeting, and it was just, from that point on, it was literally like 12 hours of complete mayhem from there. Mark and I went to a dive bar in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. We shut it down. My roommate was bartending, and then we recorded a very fun episode of Mets Up directly after. And just since then, it's kind of felt like living on a cloud as a Mets fan. I know a lot of people out there are a little impatient with the way the Mets have treated the market since signing Juan Soto, but it's a long offseason. We got many months to go here. And it really actually clicked in today, the Soto thing, because I'm starting to do some fantasy baseball research and make some content there. And I was on Fangraphs looking at projections, and I saw Juan Soto NYM in the little box. And I was like, oh my God, he's on the Mets. He's actually on the Mets. So that was the first time I saw it in the wild, without actually perceiving in my mind ahead of time Juan Soto's a Met. Just seeing it on the website, Juan Soto, New York Mets. I was like, wow, this is the best.
Oh my God. I think the biggest pinch me moment that I got with Soto was, not funny enough, not even as much as presser for whatever reason, but when I saw him change all of his socials and then his little hype video after the presser of new chapter, I'm like, oh God, okay. And I'm getting chills and goosebumps just thinking about it, especially for you, James. So I knew it was, he's going back to the Bronx the entire time. So that really, I think that kind of caught you off guard. So follow up on Soto. One, how much of the Bronx belief was your internal Mets fan pessimism saying there's just not a chance in hell it's going to happen, so don't get your hopes up, versus genuinely believing that the Yankees were still the team to beat there?
I was 50-50 of those. I mean, it's just living my whole life, almost 30 years old, being a Mets fan, growing up in New York and New Jersey. It's just the Mets don't get free agents that the Yankees want. That's kind of how it's always been. So the fact that this happened for the first time was a bit of a shock to the system. And I just figured that he played with them for a year. He hit in front of Aaron Judge. He went to the World Series. He watched his team blow the World Series in hilarious fashion. But I figured just getting to that point with the guys he spent that entire year with, I figured that was going to be really, really hard to overcome that. And it was really hard to overcome that. Steve Cohen paid a lot of money to overcome that. But we're still happy it happened, and that's all that matters.
It is all that matters. So as we look ahead now for the Mets, what is next? Remember, Stearns is sleeping apparently. So the Mets are done making moves after Juan Soto, and that's how it's going to be. And the sleepiest move that he's made to this point has been the new acquisition of Griffin Canning. So I love to spend a solid, at least 60 seconds, if not longer, with you on Griffin Canning as to what you like most about him, especially as our buddy Isaac Rothman, as I defer to him as a pitching guru, you are one as well. So I'd love to hear what you like most about him, because from the forefront, I can tell right away, has a meatball of a fastball, really nice off-speed pitches. Now it's about really figuring out how are they going to fine-tune that arsenal and change things a bit with Hefner and Desi. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, Isaac's a monster. I love that you guys are doing a bunch of stuff together. But I think it's funny you also were like, I'll give you 60 seconds. That's how Mark tees up for me to talk about the nonsense pitches on.
Are you
on Mets
serious?
Stuff.
I didn't even know that.
Like we did today. I talked about Brandon Waddell, a guy that we signed from the KBO, who used to be in the Cardinals organization. He was like, James, I'll give you 45 seconds right now. Convince me that Brandon Waddell could be good. And I was like, okay, here's what I got. But the thing with Canning is that, just bottom line, this is someone who was a high draft pick, a pretty good prospect, lots of injury concerns, and he came from an organization that really has never done a good job of maximizing or getting even the close to the most talent they possibly could, especially out of pitchers. So just strip everything down from there. The fact that there's someone that has pedigree, had potential, and came from an organization that isn't really good at extracting said potential, that's how you know that there's upside here in general. And the second part about Canning that's really good is he has two really good secondary pitches. His changeup is a plus pitch. He gets a lot of seam shifted wake on that. And his slider, which kind of acts more like a turbo gyro slider, it drops really hard on you. So right there, bang, you have a really good starting place to work with a good breaking ball and a good off-speed pitch in that changeup. And you said the fastball's a meatball. It's always been a terrible pitch. It sits in a dead zone, which means it kind of acts exactly how a batter expects it to act. So when a batter reacts and puts his barrel in the strike zone, usually Griffin Canning's fastball is there, and usually that means that ball is going into a gap through the hole or usually over the fence. So I think the Mets are going to do with Griffin Canning is, I'm sure we wind up Hefner, Yeagers, the whole crew over there. I'm sure they just tell him to become a sinker guy, and he winds up with the sinker and the changeup to play off each other, and the slider, which kind of is a gyro slider or a death ball, is like a really, really deep pitch in colloquial term that will just drop underneath hitters' bats. I feel like too, depending on how he takes to the sinker, how long that takes to figure out, I have a feeling that we might get him going with a sweeper as well, like we kind of did with Severino last year. Severino had the makings of one before, and Canning's curveball acts kind of sweeper sometimes, but I feel like we just tell him, get rid of that fastball. It's a bad pitch. It's never going to work. Maybe it's the first thing to try, and they scrap the idea in a couple of days if you can't get it, but scrap the fastball, figure out a sinker, and then if we can get the sinker, the slider, and the changeup together, then you throw in a sweeper, and now suddenly you might actually have 3 or 4 plus pitches at the same time. There's someone that could give the Mets like 100 innings and like a 4.1 ERA, which would be amazing for $4 million. No one in the league gives you that for $4 million. So he could have a 7 ERA and get cut in May, just like Adrian Hauser. Like, that's also super on the table, but that's okay. It's $4 million. No worries.
So out of those pitches, because I love to call them the triple S's, whether we're talking about sinkers, sliders, sweepers, or even splitties, or the quadruple S's, if you want to label them that, that is very much a David Stearns emphasis that we've seen since he's arrived here, especially with the relievers that he's picked up on those invites to spring training where they maybe have, again, a meatball of a fastball, but they really do have unique movement there on, say, their slider has a lot of horizontal movement or their splitty has a lot of action going. So what do you think is the biggest X factors with those pitches specifically, which is why a young, more vibrant mind like Stearns has an emphasis with those more than maybe some other GMs or just people with pitching knowledge in the game currently are emphasizing?
I think even zooming out is kind of about where the Mets organizational philosophy has gone these last few years, especially starting with Hefner and then Yeagers, now Stearns, where it's where most of the good teams are and where a bunch of the middle teams like us are heading, but it's about seeking out trace rather than production. Like, I don't even think that, this might be crazy for some people here, but I don't think there's any chance at all that the Mets, when they were talking about Griffin Canning internally, looked at his 5.19 ERA or 1.40 FIP. I think they just look at the way he releases the ball, the way balls come off his hand, and we're game planning which pitches they think can fit with the way that he throws a baseball. And then knowing that seeing the way he can throw his changeup, seeing the way his slider works, seeing the way his fastball failed. That's how they can game plan a sinker, which he's throwing a tiny, tiny bit of. But then maybe then you can get a sweeper off the end of that slider too that goes where the curveball used to be. Like it's just kind of, it's about making very specific, very personalized, individualized plans for these pitchers rather than okay, just keep doing what you're doing. Maybe we can do a tweak here or a tweak there. But I'm sure with the Mets and all these other pitchers they signed, Clay Holmes, Frankie Montas, even guys like Brandon Waddell and your boy Genesis Cabrera. I'm sure with every single guy, there's a very personalized plan that's coming from Yeagers and Hefner and the rest of the Mets pitching development team, and that's kind of the key emphasis. It catalyzes these signings. Like the Mets aren't going to sign guys in this generation of the Mets without hard plans for them. And really no teams ever should, almost in any sport, but in pitching especially, because it only takes a few months, sometimes even guys a few weeks, sometimes for guys who just have this pitchability. Like I know Bryce Miller told a story that he picked up a pitch from a reliever that the Mariners had in the roster for only 1 month, and he picked it up in one bullpen session. He started throwing it a week later in games. That kind of took him to the next level. So it all depends on the pitcher. It all depends on the coaches, but it's this idea of we're going for traits and we have plans for every single player, and we're going to do everything we can to make our things be actionable for them and turn them into better players.
That's a perfect segue into expanding a little bit more on the pitching lab, because I get asked all the time, Wardy, what is the pitching lab? Why do you talk about it so much? Why are you so emphatic? And mind you, I'm someone who has no problem being wrong, especially in the early goings, like the first month and a half of the 2024 season. I was feeling it just as much as any other Mets fan. I'm like, all right, and we got to get rid of Hef Dog. We got to get rid of Hef Dog. Like, whatever we need to do is fine. And that's fine. And I've learned my lesson. And, you know, I'm very proud to say that Jeremy Hefner is my pitching coach. And there's a reason why, out of all the tenures the past 4 years, he has been the one constant that if the Mets can continue to keep in the organization, they're absolutely going to do everything in their power to do so. So I'm going to expand on what I believe the pitching lab to be, and that I would love to hear you to piggyback off of that from your understanding. Okay. So for me, when I look at what the lab is, this starts in Port St. Lucie, working all the way up there. As we talk about Yeagers, especially as we get into spring training, what the Mets are doing now is in a lot of ways of what they weren't doing, or at least at such a micro level in comparison to Wilpons days, where they didn't really have much of an analytics department, and now they've expanded that greatly. They have a lot of different people that are using their intel on the pitching mechanics, and even a guy, Isaac, who we're both good friends with, they have people like that actively in the organization that are going out of their way to just find, again, little differences for these pitchers to say, hey, if we can make these tweaks, don't worry about you've been doing this your entire career. We're just going to either abolish this completely or we're going to go in this route. But there's a higher level of confidence in that, whereas previously in the Mets so-called pitching lab during the DeGrom, Harvey, Syndergaard days, that was a lot more based off of not only their initial talent, but also how their player development was in general as in-house options. Now seeking external options, we've seen how much we've struggled to get proper adjustments with like the Rick Porcellos, Michael Wacha before he became good again, among many others over the years. Now the Mets finally have a structure in place where they're trying to build very similar to the Dodgers in the sense of we don't want to necessarily be the team that's relying on overspending each year for key talent, but rather being the team that turns out talent that other teams then overspend for after we already got the peak value out of, whether that is relievers, where I know Stearns will churn out as many as possible every single year, or to a certain degree now we're seeing in starters where there's a belief that Stearns almost views them like running backs in the NFL, where if they're not a guy that makes a prime fit sense long term for the rotation, they're simply not going to go out of their way to seek said player and throw all those dollars, and they don't have to because they can find it internally in other areas and really, again, fine-tuning some of these pitchers with their pitch shape, which Desi Driscoll is known for, among other things. So what would you add on to that, and am I completely wrong?
No, I mean, you're right about that. I would even add that it's a very literal thing. Like it's a building in Clover Park. Like the pitching lab is an actual place.
Okay,
like,
so there you go. Yeah,
it's a place that the players go. It's kind of like a pilgrimage for the pitchers. And I know that a big reason we haven't is become so vaunted and so like critically acclaimed as this, because Eric Yeagers, who was one of the architects of Driveline, which is like the known pitching lab.
Right.
Like, these are all pitching labs. Driveline, Tread, the two most famous ones to name them, and then a couple
Bodie, who works with the Red Sox now, is from there too, right?
Kyle Boddy. Kyle Boddy is
he's
the founder of Driveline. The Eric Yeagers for a while was his right hand man. Worked his way up there for a while, and I believe also spent a stint of time in Cincinnati when Boddy went there before he went back to Driveline. Now back to the Red Sox, but not positive on that. But it's literally just the fact that the Mets have a place that has high-speed cameras, a bunch of motion sensors, every single kind of TrackMan, Edgetronic that you could possibly have. And oftentimes a pitcher, it's because most teams, not that most teams don't have this, but a lot of teams don't have it to the extent that the Mets do. So
Right.
oftentimes pitchers in the offseason, you hear it all the time on Twitter, this guy went to Driveline, that guy went to Driveline. They will spend their own money and go themselves and buy a few weeks or a month or two at Driveline, and they will train there, and they'll work with their coaches, and they'll use their equipment, use their technology. It's a very important thing. The fact that the Mets have this themselves internally means two things. One, that their players don't feel the need to go elsewhere for training, so you can keep everything in house. That kind of creates this camaraderie thing with players in an organization, especially pitchers in an organization. They're all together. They're all working with each other. I see this, you see that. More coaches, more heads. Like everyone kind of involved. It's collaborative. But then the other part of that is when you go out of the organization, that whenever you're doing something, every time you throw a pitch at the regular drive line or tread, they're keeping your data. When you throw a pitch, like that's getting logged into their system. When you go to the Mets pitching lab and you're a Mets pitcher, we have all of your data. So if you're doing something that works really, really well in January, but then in May something goes wrong, Eric Yeager's Jeremy Hefner could pull up a video for you on the iPad and be like, look, this is how your knee was. This is how your elbow was. This is where your head, your neck, your shoulder. Like you can kind of look back in a really, really slow motion, high profile way of how you were doing something right. And that's kind of the key. The fact that we can keep all of our data and all of our video in-house. There's no break in the action. Like everything is very consistent, and all the coaches get all the access to it, and you can easily identify, change, maneuver, mix up, switch around whenever you have to, because we have it all ourselves. And if you guys want to get another good look at the inside of the pitching lab, Tim Britton wrote a great article about it last spring training on The Athletic. And he had an article.
Oh, I remember that piece. That's right. Yeah.
He had like every single quadruple A pitcher on there that the Mets had then. It was Eric Orza, it was Josh Walker, it was Grant Hartwig. A lot of guys who are not really part of the organization anymore. But it stuck with me that one of the last quotes in it actually came from Reed Garrett. And he was talking about a lot of the things I just said at the time. Reed Garrett was a pure afterthought, didn't become a legitimate middle relief option in this bullpen. And he said what I just said, which is kind of what I'm reading right now. It gave me the ideas. If things are going a little wrong, that way you have your baseline. You could go back and look at it. It said reliever Reed Garrett before Reed Garrett was Reed Garrett. So it's just the fact that pitchers don't have to leave the organization to get their help. And then if they don't have to leave, then we have everything with us. So if anything goes wrong, we can go back. Our coaches can help, and they can identify problems and create some more efficient solutions.
And that right there is among the factors as to why the Mets had a positive meeting with Roki Sasaki today. Yeah. Sasaki, who he and his camp have reportedly been known to look up and certainly admire what the Mets are doing with their pitching lab. Now, James, I know that when I was texting you, you didn't see the news initially, so that was exciting. And so first and foremost, one, how much do you believe the Mets have a legitimate shot to land Sasaki? And I will say that I think it's less than 50%, but I do think that they actually have a legitimate shot, whereas I didn't think that maybe 2 months ago, per se, to the same magnitude. And secondly, what about Sasaki and his game do you love most and how he will project long-term? Because he's only 22 years of age. Like, he's such an anomaly, a greater anomaly than even what we saw there a year ago in Yoshinobu Yamamoto. So just break it down for me, every aspect of Roki Sasaki and what you're loving about him.
The first thing was just with getting Sasaki. I agree with you. I don't think it's a tremendous chance, but I would put the Mets chances around.
Oh, wait, James, give me 1 second. Just put a pin in it for 1 second. You didn't do anything wrong. I just have to unplug and replug my headphones quick. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Yeah, should I still talk? Everything good?
Okay, hold on. James, can you go out and I'll bring you back in?
Yeah.
Thank you. Apologies, everybody. I just want to make sure my audio is playing. Give me 1 second. Okay, that's playing. Cool. Okay, you hear me, James?
Yeah, do you hear me?
No way. Of course I can't hear you. But that I'm not too concerned because I've had a hiccup like this not too long ago. That's separate from the issue we had last time. So just give me 1 second as I try to troubleshoot this. It is ironic though, considering what we were talking about right in the beginning of the show. That tends to happen, obviously. Of course.
Every time.
Let's see. Mute and unmute yourself for a second, James. Try one more thing.
Hello?
Hello? Still nothing.
Hello?
That's bizarre. Okay. All right, James left. I'm actually going to send him a new link. Let's do that. James, if you hear me, I'm going to send you a new link real quick, and we're going to try it that way. If that doesn't work, then I have one more plan that we're going to do that should resolve this either way. All right, James, go to your DM. It's there. Apologies for the hiccup, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience.
What's up, Worthy?
Okay.
Got me?
Check one. All right, James. Now what we're going to do, because unfortunately this isn't working, I'm just going to call you on your phone if that's okay.
Okay.
Is that cool? All right. I bet. All right.
What the heck? I hear you, dude. This is fucking nuts.
Okay.
What's up, Worthy?
All right.
You
We
hear me?
good? Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I hear you. I'm pretty sure we are good now. So yeah, everyone can hear you. Everyone else can hear
Oh,
you.
you just
fine.
can't hear me.
I just couldn't hear you for whatever odd reason. So that's fine, though. I've done this specifically like numerous times when the audio's cut out. So it's a troubleshoot, but we'll go with it. So, okay, to
That's
get
fine.
back into Roki Sasaki for a second, where did we leave off last?
I think we're just like talk about him, the chances, and what you think of him as a pitcher.
Right. So what about him and his game is most appealing to you, especially at the age of 22? Obviously, we saw the velocity fluctuate this past season, but from everything that I read and learned up on, it seemed that had a lot more to do with him just figuring himself out as a pitcher. Because, again, he's still so young in his professional career. So it's about really toying with his mechanics among other things. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts on his current arsenal and how do you think it'll grade out there in the coming years at the MLB level?
I mean, I think it'll just be phenomenal. I think the fact that he's still only 23 years old means that you hope you get an ace eventually. I don't know if Roki will jump into the league and be a super duper superstar immediately. And a big reason for that is that while 2 years ago in the MPB, he was throwing 100 miles an hour with regularity. He had one of the highest strikeout minus walk rates in the history of the league over there in Japan. And he had just ridiculous drop on his splitter, a great slider that was sitting almost 90 miles an hour. Everything took a bit of a step back in 2024 as he dealt with some injuries, which some people speculate, I don't believe it, but speculate that that could be why he seems like he's in a big rush to come to America. Because if anything bad does happen to him, then he's already here on a major league team with major league doctors and major league coaches and all that stuff. But
Right.
I think even at the way the guy Sasaki was last year, sitting 96, 97, getting up to 98 miles an hour with a wicked splitter, that would already be one of the best in Major League Baseball. Like you're getting someone who on a rookie contract could be one of easily the 10 best pitchers in baseball if things break right. And if things don't break right, he's still going to be a really, really, really good pitcher. The floor is kind of what we've seen from Kodai Senga. Like I'm pretty confident that's the floor.
That's crazy.
Good.
Like just in general.
That's simply how electric he is. Like he had the strikeout minus walk rate, which is a stat I love when I evaluate pitchers, which is you take someone's strikeout rate, the percentage of hitters they strike out, and the percentage of hitters they walk, and you subtract the walks from the strikeouts. And it was above 30%. And hit 2 years ago in the MPB. Tanaka, Kodai, those guys were barely sniffing 20%. Yamamoto was like 24%. Like the fact that Sasaki was doing that, really, no one had ever seen stuff like this in the MPB. I understand that major league hitters are much better at facing velocity than hitters in Japan because they don't see it as much. But this is someone who could be like you could be signing Paul Skeens. That's where the upside is.
It's insane when you look at just how unique of a circumstance he is, but how we have now back-to-back years with young, dominant Japanese pitchers at most 25 years of age and now heading into bigs and having this immediate impact. And naturally, the biggest concern right away is, okay, we already have the MPB Dodgers as is, so naturally that means that Roki Sasaki is going to go there, right? Well, we've heard a lot of comments to refute that or simply to say, okay, yes, there may in fact be some preference there potentially with LA and or San Diego with his long-lasting relationship with his father, one could argue, and Yu Darvish. He's twice the age as him, which is insane. He's 38 to 22. But Point is, though, is that even with there being that potential West Coast bias, it appears that the Mets are going to be given a legitimate shot here, i.e. the meeting today. And this comes right after we hear that the Yankees were on the cusp of about to have a meeting with Roki Sasaki as well. So I'm really, really interested to see how Sasaki is viewing this media market as an emphasis as to how much is that going to play a factor into his decision. We heard from Joel Wolf, his agent there, the same agent as Kodai Senga, as we know that he didn't handle the media well. The media was pretty rough to Sasaki, which while I don't condone it, I can see why, because he's this dominant, young, electric pitcher that's like, I don't want to be a part of this league anymore, when he essentially is just getting his career started. His team doesn't benefit on the posting fee nearly as much as, say, if they waited a couple of years till he could be posted like Yamamoto, where that's a $50 million bonus going to his team there on a $325 deal. Like, that's a lot of money. So I can see the media, why they gave him such a big problem, but I can also see for a guy that has essentially, around the same age as me, as to struggling mentally with that, especially now going to the States for the first time to begin his true professional career. So what do you have to say about Sasaki and how he's handled himself that we've known in the public eye? And secondly, how much do you think the Mets actually benefit in their efforts here with their pitching lab that you referenced greatly there with Yeagers, with Hefner, now Desi Driscoll, who I absolutely love as a lateral move of a hire from the Yankees to the Mets. I'm really happy that happened. What are your thoughts on all that?
I think in terms of the Mets, it's there's definitely good and bad, because like you said, he did mention how he didn't love the big media market, and the Mets and New York is the biggest media market basically on earth, and the Mets have I can't imagine many baseball teams have more beat writers and more people in the media scrum every single day in the New York Mets. Like, it's a firestorm every time any player in the Mets does anything.
Yep.
So I think that, like, but then also on the other hand, like you said, the pitching lab, he said he wants places that are good at keeping pitchers healthy, and the Mets in the last year, I mean, again, I don't know if that's the best sample size, but we've shown incredible
That's something
ability.
so funny about saying the last year. You were looking great.
It's true, because that was I distinctly remember when we signed Luis Severino, that the first thing David Stern said was, we think we have a plan to keep him healthy, and that's the biggest thing that's stopping him from being a successful pitcher again. And what do you know? He threw the most innings he's thrown in about 6 full seasons. So, and then we know that this year coming in, Frankie Montas explicitly said he liked what he heard from people with the Mets. We had Trevor May on Mets up today, and he said that it's getting around baseball now. The Mets are becoming one of those teams where if you're a pitcher and you want to be better on the other side than you were when you just signed your contract, you go to the Mets, and then you're more favorable on the other side of it. So I think all of that really works in our favor with Sasaki. And I think it is interesting, too, because a lot of people are comparing him to Yamamoto, because it's natural to do that. Right. Yamamoto was the Japanese superstar last year. He was a pitcher, flamethrower, pretty young. But they're very different, I think, in terms of how they were viewed in Japan specifically. Because Yamamoto was a phenom similar to Sasaki, but he was more of a stalwart. He was more of a workhorse. He was consistently putting up 180, 190 inning seasons, even when he was in his early 20s. And I think it was known that he kind of went about this the right way. I think that was kind of, people were proud of Yamamoto for doing his service time, then going to the States, and then getting his team that big payday, like you mentioned, the $50 million. Even Otani, because the posting rules were different then, because he also came over as an amateur. He got the Nippon Ham Fighters $20 million. Sasaki is going to get the I forgot what team they play for. I can't remember right now. The Shiba Lotte. He's going to get them like a couple million, maybe, depending on how this works out. Like, it's just they're going to be a victim of the posting system. But Yamamoto kind of apparently had more of this bravado about him. Like, he was a snappy dresser. He was out more with his endorsements, the paparazzi, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a swagger that comes with Yamamoto for sure.
Yeah, he seemed to be a bit more of a star, where people talk about Sasaki, and maybe this just could be from age and lack of experience, but he's a bit more reserved. He's a bit more within himself. He's a lot more of a family guy specifically, and we know how well the Mets treat their star players' families now. We know they treat them very, very well, so I think that's something else that works well too. I really have no idea. Like, I think Sasaki truly doesn't know where he's going to sign. I believe he prefers the West Coast. I think that's natural. You're simply 6 hours closer to flying home if you're in Los Angeles, San Diego, compared to New York. But there's definitely a compelling argument to be made about a team that is a plus team in player development, a plus team pitching development, treats family really, really well, will make it inviting for everybody, and has shown at least a little bit of an ability to keep players healthy, which seems to be really, really, really important to him right now.
Yeah, and when we talk about how the Mets are planning to approach him, I would love to just speculate that the red carpet was once again rolled out. And, we saw the treatment with Yamamoto. We've seen it, obviously, to a great degree with Soto. We've seen it with pretty much every player that the Mets have just shown a solid level of interest in, that they have won leaps and bounds to try to land said player. And the uniqueness about this circumstance, obviously, is that the Mets don't have the ability to flex that financial muscle if that was at all an incentive initially for Roki. Obviously, the money will be there for him, but that isn't the number one driver right now. It's just about getting to the States and really kickstarting his career. And it's an interesting one to figure out if the Mets are at all going to consider maybe trying to trade for more bonus pool money, because I know that they can trade with teams to, I believe, north of 60% a team can trade away those dollars. So the Mets sitting around 7-8 million now, north of 10 plus, to try to give themselves a little bit of an edge. Not that I think it'll make a drastic difference, but it's just something to bear in mind. So when you look at how the current IFA pool is set as we get to January 15th, the Mets are currently committed, at least $5 million to Ellie Pena. Do you think that this is one of those things where the Mets, like, without question, just have to decommit here because it's Roki Sasaki? I feel like it's obvious. But is there at all a world where they can, like, decommit and still try to land him in the end? Or do you think he's automatically going to be swooped up if the Mets are like, I'm sorry, we have to shift our focus to Sasaki right now, or it goes without saying, and then they don't land Sasaki before we get to the official signing period, right around January 15th, and then Pena's still there? Like, what do you think happens in a circumstance like this? Because, again, it's so unique. We haven't really had one to talk about.
Yeah, it is truly unprecedented. And I wish I knew more about these IFA rules, but I'm really not sure if anybody does. I think the whole thing is kind of the wild, wild west.
Right.
Teams make deals with guys. The Padres, I believe, got a sanction a few months ago for signing a player who was allegedly, like, lying about his age, was actually 14 years old. So I think that this entire system that Major League Baseball probably needs to look at just in general and handle. But with that, I don't know. Like, the Major League Baseball is so specific with things that happen under the table that can affect competition with this. Like, I know the Braves years and years ago got a huge sanction for giving players illicit bonuses.
They should not have Ozzie Albies and Ronald Acuna Jr. and I will stand by that.
It's just like there seems to be I don't know. They seem to be really, really specific about some things in this, and then really, really hands off with other things about this. So I don't know if the Mets
like purposely hands off, and you're like,
yeah.
huh?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not really, again, it's like the Wild West. It's also like some things. It's like cool. It's like these 14-year-olds from a lot of impoverished areas are getting huge money that can, like, change their and their families' lives forever. And the other side, it's like, wow, these teams really have just carte blanche to handle this however they possibly want. There's not really any rhyme or reason to have it. So I don't know, but I think in terms of just like a value proposition, you do definitely drop the 16-year-old prospect to get the 23-year-old potential ace. Like, that's just an easy decision. If you can possibly do that, you just do that and you say, you know what, we'll get the next guy, and that's okay. But I don't know. I'm sure that the Mets are going to be creative. I'm sure that they're in these meetings every single day. I'm sure that kind of stuff's all handled before you even go to this meeting today with Sasaki. Like, these guys are working around the clock. They are so much smarter than all of us. It's just simply not even funny.
To be a fly on the wall, I hope, and I don't really hope, I expect, because especially with how the Mets have really been upping, like, how they want to present themselves as an organization, I bet we're going to get a version of, like, Hard Knocks out of them over the next, like, 5 years or so. Which would just be absolutely insane. It has to come to baseball. There has to be some type of version that we could get of that to give us an inside look. Not for, like, even half of a 162, just like a smidge. Just give us, like, a couple games, and the impact from the day by day, and then back in the clubhouse and even the meeting rooms, especially, like, leading up to trade deadline day. Like, that would be amazing. But what's also amazing is the 1,000 people that we have watching right now. So thank you guys so much for taking the time this evening. If you guys don't know James Sciano, make sure to check him out there at the Mets Stuff Podcast and all the respective writing that he does there. Does a fantastic job not only covering the Mets, but MLB wide coverage. Check him out there as always, folks. And James, I got to ask you now, staying quickly on the topic of pitching before we get into some of the other storylines that came out through Paston's latest article and others today, I have to ask, when we look at the rotation right now, right? Griffin Canning right now is slotted as, I'd say, a 6-7 starter, right? So if the Mets are destined to land at least one more starter in the free agent or trade market of quality in the realm of the Buehlers, Manayas, or someone in the trade value, that's great. But there's still a route where they can not only land them, but then find themselves potentially landing Roki Sasaki, say, a couple weeks later. So what's the thought process in your mind on the Mets are still potentially 2, like, quality pitchers away, and even though they aren't prioritizing Sasaki in the sense of, like, we can't view it as we're going to be a slam dunk suitor for him because we might miss out on key guys that we're trying to add for the rotation that we know for certain the impact they'll have on us next season, where Sasaki's still a question mark. If you bring back Sean Manaea, if you sign Walker Buehler, if you trade for a Castillo, a Luzardo, a Keller, what have you, and then you sign Sasaki, the Mets, just like that, have set themselves up pretty much as brilliant as one could hope for getting into 2025.
Totally. I think that's why we should all be exhibiting patience. I truthfully
Yeah.
think that the Sasaki situation has kind of frozen the pitching market in general because he's such a
Right. Like,
unicorn in
yeah,
terms of
one
free
way or
agent
another it
issuance.
has.
Like, I think that's a reason that we've had this like schism in the last, I don't know, week or so where there's no more movement, it feels like, seemingly at all in any free agents, especially any free agent pitchers. And I think that someone like Corbin Burns' market is not developed. Jack Flaherty's market is not developed. Shomanai's market seemingly is not developed at all. Like, I think that with every passing day, it gives the Mets a better chance to sign any of these guys because they all will inch back closer to the years and the money that we want to spend. I fully believe they're not done. Like, at this time last year, we had just signed Luis Severino, and no one in the Mets community even had any idea that Sean Manaea was going to be a member of this team. Like, there's just simply a long, long, long way to go. I wouldn't sell the Mets short in the trade market. I feel like there's just going to be some guys that shake loose. We saw a rumor of Pablo Lopez circulate today. I know that he's going to be ridiculously expensive if he actually does become available. I have a feeling that the Diamondbacks offseason isn't exactly going the way that they wanted it to, or they just probably have to cut some corners somewhere. Like, I know that Zach Gallen's a possibility. And
Yeah.
there's probably a world where you can get Zach Gallen for less of a cost if you just take the Jordan Montgomery money away, and then there are your two pitchers again. I know some Mets fans, the same ones who were saying that if we don't get Jordan Montgomery, it's an offseason failure 9 months ago, 10 months ago, or now the one
Not a
saying
failure, but I really
Yeah.
want him, and I was very
now-
vocal on wanting him. Yeah.
This one I don't think is you, but they're the one saying right now, if you get Jordan Montgomery, it's dumpster Dave all over again, which is like, I don't think a year should change your opinion that much. But I think that there's just going to be a lot more creativity for the next 90 days of the Mets before we get to spring training than I think a lot of people want to give David Stearns credit for, because all he's shown so far in his 10 years as general manager of this team is just the utmost creativity and not really expanding past where he's willing to go money-wise, years-wise, prospect-wise, capital-wise, cost-wise. I think that's amazing for an executive to be so disciplined. Truthfully, it's a gift that we have that he's running this team.
And he's not sitting on his hands the way that a lot of fans would love to perpetuate him to be doing. You know, he's constantly working throughout the regular season as well. We saw it right away. Listen, I understand the Mets had a lot of their ebbs and flows, their peaks and valleys with their bullpen and their pitching staff in general in 2024. But to look at, like, with the pitchers that they worked with throughout a good portion of the year and how much they overcame, still got 2 games shy of the dance, and the constant changes that we saw in the pen because of David Stearns not sitting on his hands, always trying to be a step ahead. And even while I do believe he gave a longer leash than needed to Jake Diekman, for example, I did understand it to a degree given the fact that the Mets really didn't have any sliver of a quality of a lefty option, the bullpen, because of Brooks Raley going down right before the season began. So that, like, really shot them in the foot. And then you had the other factors that, you know, when you looked at the bullpen throughout the course of the season, all the highs and lows that came with it, Reed Garrett, all the great strengths that he had, even when he did struggle, the Mets still committed to him, and they made sure to go about things properly. He had his long time frame there from going into the post-All-Star break, not post-All-Star break, but going into the break with injury, took a little bit to get back, and then he was nails for the Mets at times throughout the course of the year. Jose Budo made strides, Daniel Nunez. So many of these pitchers that we would have never fathomed impacted the Mets to a great magnitude, and they did. And that's all to the credit of Stearns, is not necessarily with all the specific development, but rather having the proper eye and being wary of what we have in-house, and to not just refute it because they haven't been given an opportunity prior. And that's one of the many things that is very appealing to me about David, and it's going to be all the more interesting to see what he does next this offseason, especially on the offensive end post Juan Soto, because we know the Mets are actively involved in the Alex Bregman sweepstakes, and I have been a pessimist on the Bregman's front in the past. I still am to a degree, even though I will say that his Houston splits aren't as pronounced as I initially believed them to be. If you really look at his year-by-year projection, especially in power and home runs, he would project the exact same at Citi Field every single game as you would in a normal 162 that he's done both on the road and at home. So that was a little bit of an eye-opener to me, but we hear from Jeff Passan today that the Mets are still among teams that are pursuing Bregman and have had persistent pursuit there. So it's not like it's something where they just chimed in and that's that. That's active as we can speak. And we know that Bregman is looking like he will be getting a $200+ million contract, superseding Max Fried's at 8 years, $208 million or so. So with the Astros not having a willingness to go 6 years, and we'll get into Arenado before we wrap up the show with him saying, no, I'm not going to Houston right now. Where do you think the Mets find themselves in the realm of Bregman? Because Will Salmon, buddy of the channel, great guy, he said a couple days ago in one of his latest pieces how He just doesn't see the Mets going there, even 150 plus million for Alex Bregman because of how Stearns operates. I tend to lean in that direction heavily, but the fact that there really wasn't anything about Bregman getting to that dollar amount and any pessimism on the Mets' active pursuit of him kind of tells me that right in hand with the Willy Adames rumors to begin the offseason, there is something to be said about the uncomfortability at the hot corner with Mark Vientos. And I think even with us as fans who saw throughout the regular season that outside of that major hiccup of a game there against the Angels in LA and a couple others, and then what we saw there in the playoffs, which was to a greater magnitude in Philly especially. Stearns prides himself on great defense. We know that along with the pitching. And the Mets, I think, are going to be fine if they have Vientos as their starting third baseman next season. But I also see why it makes a lot of sense to potentially shift him to first base and or DH, depending on Alonso's future too. So what are your personal feelings about Bregman on where the status is there? And ultimately, do you actually see the Mets being as willing to go as, say, 5-6 years, $200+ million for him?
No, I agree with you and Will. I don't think there's really any chance. I think this Mets thing with Bregman is just simply smoke. I think it's Scott Boras being Scott Boras, just trying to drum up some interest, understanding the market that the Mets might have a hole, the Mets are going to spend some money, yada yada. I think that the Mets are really just there's a great term I'm a big history guy. I majored in history in college. There's a great term that the United States generals told their soldiers in the Revolutionary War when they had very little supplies and they had bayonets, which were a very poor shot. And it was do not shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. So you have to be right in front of you to waste the gunpowder on you. And I think that's how David Stearns is going to approach this market and most free agency markets that we're ever going to have together. Hopefully the rest of all of our lives. But I don't think that the Mets jump for guys like Bregman. I think this includes Pete Alonso. I think this includes Corbin Burns. Unless you get to a spot where they're kind of in the same position as Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery last offseason, where here's a 3-year deal. You have an opt-out after 1. You have an opt-out after 2. It's for the exact AAV you want, maybe even 5% more, 7% more, because you're giving up some years in the back end, but no one's offering you them anyway. Now we'll sign you. Now we'll bring you into this team. I can't see a world where the Mets are going to give $200 million to Alex Bregman. Even though I do think that Alex Bregman has become underrated in the baseball landscape. I think he's
a solid such a good player. Defensive year last year too, like sneaky good.
He's always a great defensive player. He can still hit for a decent average. Last year the walks fell, but I'm pretty confident that he'll be able to get those back up. He's probably going to be a lock for at least 50, 55, possibly even 60 extra base hits. The ISO is good. The leadership is good. Like he's a very solid ball player. One that most baseball teams would be really, really lucky to have. That being said, I don't think he's worth $200 million. I don't think many guys are worth $200 million. And there's the Mets. I think the Mets are trying to do what the Dodgers have been done really, really well over the last 5-ish years, where you don't sign guys in the middle class of free agency anymore. You sign guys for 1 or 2 year deals, and then when the monsters like Juan Soto, Mookie Betts, and Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani become available, and Vlad Guerrero Jr., that's when you pounce. That's when you give all of the money that you've been saving to the guys that are worth it, the guys that are true team elevators. And at this point, Bregman, while he's a really good ball player, he's not the guy. He's not like an elevator anymore. He's not a guy that's going to push you over the edge. He's a guy that you could be on your team. He'll be a part of a World Series team. He could be an all-star here and there, but he's not someone who's a true game breaker like those other guys I just mentioned. Like that's how we wound up with Juan Soto, because we were able to clear enough money in the last year and a half to make this move and not have it completely hamstring our team development. So I can't see the Mets. I think this hurts Pete Alonso. I just can't see them shopping in that middle tier with 5, 6, 7 year AAVs for players that aren't super duper elite. But that being said, I agree with you that I don't think that it's fake. It's not true that the Mets would like to improve somewhat defensively over Mark Vientos at third base, if it makes sense. But I also think that the Mets are willing to play him there. They were willing to play him all of last year. And I think that how much we saw Mark Vientos improve from last year to this year at the plate, I don't think there's any doubt that he could do that in the field as well. He seems to be a really hard worker. He seems to have a ton of natural talent. He's a monster, truthfully. So I think he could definitely get better there. But I just think that it's all open-mindedness right now from the Mets. But the stopper, the blocker is giving guys that mid-tier of contracts, like the $24 million AAVs for 6-7 years. I just don't see those happening.
And I think that this is something that more Mets fans, the more they grasp, it'll be great for us all, because this has been the widespread belief, because we've seen it with our own eyes since Stearns has come in. He has operated in specifically that way. And I know that does bother fans that want a lot of the sexier names in the mid-tier market, where like, if we just get these guys, we're really going to shore up these areas and we're going to be well-rounded. I'm like, that's true. But what the Mets are trying to avoid is semi-long-term to long-term deals where we are going to have to eat the final 2-3+ years of that contract more than likely, because those guys aren't going to grade out well long-term. And that's okay when you do that here and there, but I can see why there's pessimism, even with an owner as wealthy and as willing to spend freely as Cohen, because if you do this consistently year after year, you're going to cause greater problems. You're going to continue to push the luxury tax, and at some point, you're going to have to make ends meet. Not that Cohen isn't more than willing to spend the dollars. It's about spending smartly and not spending blindly, right? And that has been the emphasis that Cohen has tried to hone in on and have a balance of since he became owner. And that's exactly why I think that there is still a great reality that Alonso returns to the Mets, the same way I think that there's a reality where he doesn't return the Mets. And my final remarks here on Bregman is, we know Bregman has peak. We've already seen that. He's going to give you, if say on a 5-year deal, continued years of at least 20 to 25 home runs, 70 to 85, 90 RBIs, right around the 750 to 820 OPS range. And you're looking at, again, a very balanced hitter, a guy who's a championship winner, cheating scandal, and then not cheating scandal, which I want to emphasize, because as much as I am against everything that transpired back in 2017, those 3-year stretch, I'm also against the fans that are like, oh, they're still active cheaters, when they won it all as clean, as clear-cut as they could, at least what we know publicly back in 2022. So that's, or 2023, whichever year. All I got to say about that when it comes to Bregman. Now, as we transition to Alonso, he's a fascinating one, because what we heard through the latest of Jeff Passan from rival execs there, both in the American League and the National League, is that, he's really in a bind. Like, his market is very tough at the moment. And sadly, this is reality. And for years, when I evaluate slugging first baseman / DH, they've all fallen in the same category. By the time they get into their early 30s, especially, that's where you really start to see the fall off. The defense becomes so much more lackluster with a lot of these guys, and you know what you're getting, but it becomes a lot more feast or famine, and there isn't as much consistency. Alonso has been able to pave his way as pretty much the most consistent version of that kind of player, and that is exactly why we love him so much, because he has not been your prototypical CJ Crones or many of these others that we've seen in years past, where they've raked in, ballparks that you expect them to rake, and then when they have a change of scenery, it just doesn't work. Alonso feels so wrong to be out of a Mets uniform, the same way that it also feels incredibly wrong to lock him up long-term beyond 5 years. And that's where the Mets are kind of strapped at the moment. They know that he doesn't have a massive market. They know that what Alonso's looking for, he's likely not going to get. That's why the Mets offered 7 years at north of 160 at last year's trade deadline with Billy Big Bucks. He said no. I understood that, especially because that would go in hand with his final ARB years. But Alonso bet on himself, sadly, did not have the regular season he or anyone wanted. Made up for it in the playoffs from the fan perspective, but he didn't make up for it from the market perspective. And that's why he's still in a spot right now where the Mets probably want him on that 4-5-year range, 125 to 150, 160 million there, with potentially an opt-out after, say, the first or second year. With Vladimir Guerrero Jr. just a year away from free agency, that he is inevitably hitting, unless the Blue Jays are like, we're just going to give you everything because we don't know what else to do. No one wants to stay here. No one wants to come here. What do you think is the future of Alonso based on everything we're hearing right now? Because honestly, as each passing day goes, I feel more confident that he's going to return the Mets. And I think he's going to return the Mets at a value that, one, goes a little bit in hand with what the Mets want. Two, also goes in hand with Alonso, especially if there are opt-outs involved that he is considering, because then there's a lack of pressure. This past year, I completely understood. Alonso just couldn't handle the expectation. One way or another, that added pressure as a Scott Boras client, the first time in his professional career to hit the market, that hurt him. And you saw that with his production. You saw how much he was really pressing himself when he just needed to go out there and be comfortable. If he goes into a season with, say, an opt-out, a player option, that's all for him, right? So there's really not much pressure as there is, okay, if I go and ball out, maybe I can try to rework the market again and get a bigger payday than what I got this past year. Like Blake Snell, for example, right? In the pitching side of things. So how would you evaluate Alonso's market, and what is your optimism or pessimism in the Mets bringing him back?
The market seems dead. It seems like no one is. I think everyone is aware of Alonso, and I think people are interested in Pete Alonso. I think Jeff Passan reported very specifically and literally that teams really value Alonso for the next few years. But anything past that, there's not much at all. And I think it's kind of funny when we think back about Pete Alonso's career, because I remember it was 2019, or I think it was 2019. How much was made of Pete coming up to the major leagues? And it was like he was in spring training, he was the hot prospect, he just dominated the Arizona Fall League. They're like, Pete Alonso has to break camp with the Mets. It's a disgrace that Pete Alonso doesn't break camp with the Mets. He broke camp with the Mets, and the Mets competed for a playoff spot that year, didn't pull it off, but Pete Alonso set the rookie home run record, and it was a triumphant season for him. But It's if the Mets would have done the scoundrel thing, and Pete Alonso would have sat in the minors for those 2 weeks, this discussion isn't even happening right now. Pete Alonso has one more year of team control, and he's not free agent until next year.
That's true.
And right now the Mets have one more year of cost control of Pete Alonso. But the one time in the Wilpon era, the Mets actually did the right thing. Now it's a situation where it could severely hamstring their team when they have two superstars in baseball, two of the top 10 players in the sport in their team at the same time. They could really use another middle of the lineup bat. But it's just it just seems like every day that passes, it's more likely this Pete Alonso free agency stretches into February, possibly into early March, which would be horrible. And I wonder if he possibly feels any disrespect from the organization he came up in, that they won't offer him the long-term deal. So if there's 4 other teams, because if he winds up accepting a 1+1 deal or a 2+1 deal or a 1-2-3 deal with opt-outs after each year, the Mets will not be the only team offering. Half the teams in baseball who are trying to win games are going to be offering Pete Alonso that deal. So then you wonder if Pete values the team and the city and the camaraderie more, or if there's anything personal that hits him. The fact that the Mets wouldn't give him the contract that he wanted, wouldn't even honor the contract they offered him not even a year before. So it's just a lot of awkward situations right now with Pete. I know it can't be fun. And I know he probably doesn't enjoy this because it's so clear how much he loves being a Met and how much the Mets fans love having him here. But it's just a simple issue of market dynamics right now, which is not a fun conversation on YouTube or like for fans. But it's just he's not. No one's giving him that deal, so we're not going to come over the top and give him that deal either. It's like you kind of want to get him for what you think he's worth. And there were real problems with Pete the last 2 years. The on-base percentage has dropped like a rock. The average exit velocity dropped like a rock. He's not hitting the ball hard as consistently. Like it's true problems. A lot of it might have come from that wrist injury 2 years ago, but also it still doesn't look like it's gotten any better. He might have already had his best season. He might have already had his 2 or 3 best seasons.
He definitely already had his best season. I think that can go without saying.
Well, I think his rookie year, but that was also the fake baseball, so I don't even.
Yeah, juice base. Take me back. That was fun.
I just wonder where, what the next 5 years of Pete really look like, and I still want him on the Mets. It would be amazing for Pete to wind up getting his number retired and being in the Mets Hall of Fame and setting a bunch of franchise records. But these guys probably have to come to a compromise, and I wonder if that would be seen as so disrespectful. He winds up just taking his prove-it deal somewhere else to clear his head.
Yeah, and I think the respect thing will be interesting to see how this plays out, considering the Mets have been very adamant on giving players the respect that they deserve and really trying to make them feel home and a family orientation the way that they have. This is an interesting one in the sense that it's not about necessarily as much on trying to attract a player to come here as it is how much do we want to bring back the player. I think that's the heavier debate here. If this was a year and a half ago, I think that's a much different conversation with Alonso. But to your point, when you reference those numbers, even in 2023, when a lot of the numbers, the baseline numbers were down, the high leverage, 2 out runners in scoring position numbers, the numbers where you still wanted a guy like him to step up most, they were still strong. They so nosedived in 2024, the regular season, so much so that it was laughable at one point because you're saying to yourself, there's just no way this can continue. And then it's another month, and it's another month, and it's another month, and bam, here we are with 1 out left against the Milwaukee Brewers. And if it isn't for Devin Williams, who the hell knows what we'd be talking about right now? Because Alonso, I think, really did himself great by building that stock back up, because nothing is more important than stepping up in those postseason moments. That is how you get the big bucks. But you also can't refute what was a 162 long year of playing, in a lot of ways, mediocre baseball, not to your expectations. Certainly a guy that's been as coveted as he's been in New York the past 4+ years. So to put a cap on it with Alonso, I agree with you. It's a very unfortunate one. I don't see a world where we're going to get to late February, early March. That feels like it'd be such a smack in the face to him, and he's an emotional guy, so I don't know how he would handle that. I just hope that we find a resolution post-New Year. Sometime in the month of January is when I'd imagine to happen, and I don't foresee the Mets to do anything drastic until we kind of reach a new year, because Passan also noted that the Mets are still looking for pitching depth, and they're going to try to sign a pitcher, should it not be via trade, after we get past, later on in the offseason once they fully develop, because Sean Manaea right now, Corbin Burns, if Burns had the contract, he would have signed it by now, right? He's holding out just to get the contract he's looking for in a lot of ways to Snell last year. Now, is Burns a more appealing fit as to the consistency? 1,000%. Even with some of the peripherals dropping over the past couple years, I know you may have some things to add on Corbin as well, especially the K/9. I know he's made adjustments to his arsenal to have more longevity, but there are some respective concerns with people if you're going to invest 7-8 years for a guy as to, okay, by the time he's past his age 33 season, we're going to have some major issues. Sources confirm the Mets checked in on Jonathan Neese, says Wilfredo in the chat. That got me going for a second. But when we talk about Corbin Burnes for a second, because Sham and I think we both know where that stands. We would like him back. We probably don't want him back at 4 or 5 years naturally. I think, at most 3 years, maybe with a 4th-year vesting option or something along those lines that's more creative in the Mets' favor than anything else. Where do you stand on Corbin Burnes? Because Ken Rosenthal of your buddies at Foul Territory just emphasized like 72 hours ago that, what if he does find that short-term high AAV range like Verlander, like Scherzer at 40 to 45 mil because the market isn't there. But then there's presented opt-outs after each year. Is that something that Burnes may consider? I know how much he's looked forward to free agency that I've heard from Will Salmon himself when he covered Burnes' time with the Brewers. He knows how much this is important to him, especially with how Milwaukee kind of slighted him during his time there and the arbitration cases and stuff of that nature. But if Burnes doesn't get that true payday he's looking for, that could be a unique option where the Mets can find themselves just like that swooping in. And that is where I would argue you give up that 3rd and 6th round pick next season every day of the week. Because even if it's just 1 year of Corbin Burnes, that is without question the most guaranteed ace caliber starter available in the market, where you're giving up nothing more than just the financial aspect of it.
For sure, and you're getting that pick back if Sean Manaea signs elsewhere, which I'm sure he would if you get Corbin Burnes.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
And possibly Pete Alonso. They wouldn't be the same picks. I think it'd be 4th round picks versus 3rd and 6th, so it would balance out, but not exactly. I find myself liking Corbin Burnes more and more as the day goes on. When free agency started, I was with you, and I still don't think I would give him a 7-8 year deal. I know your guy Isaac was leading the charge that he stinks. I'm joking. I'm kidding.
He was so nervous when he titled it the way he did. He's like, let's just see how this is gonna go. And then Eric Hosmer's quote tweeting him. He's like, oh my god, what do I do?
I called Jonathan Lucroy quote tweet on Monday too. So
that was sick. I saw that.
But it's the thing about Burnes, and it's been the thing of Burnes the whole time, especially now that Blake Snell is off the board, and I'm blanking on the other pitcher, and Max Fried's off the board, but it's just no one else can impact the Mets rotation 2024 or 2025 as much as Corbin Burnes right now. It's just no one will. So that for me is a big deal when you have Juan Soto on your team and Francisco Lindor in his prime, that every year you have to do your best to win a World Series. But it's hard to deny this stuff about Burnes that's been said a lot otherwise. Like his 5 straight years, his strikeout rate has dropped. 5 straight years. It's kind of unbelievable to think about. I know in a lot of those years, and I'm sure he'd argue someone would, that he had more of a role in these teams as a lone starting pitcher, at least for the last 2 years, as Brandon Woodruff got hurt, and this past year in the Orioles, as all of their pitchers got hurt, where we heard Luis Severino talk about this in the Mets too, where it's more important for you to give length and soak up innings rather than to get every strikeout you can. So then you have to sometimes pitch to more contact. And there could be an argument that Burnes possibly did that. But also, the thing that used to make Burnes so incredible was his cutter. That was a true unicorn pitch. It used to kind of just be like a 95 mile an hour, like baby slider. That was his primary pitch. And now it's not. Now it's falling a few miles an hour, and it's just kind of a regular old cutter, which is still a good pitch. It's still a plus pitch. It'll take him into his mid to late 30s and still be one of, I'm pretty confident, the 20-ish best pitchers in the league. But there probably isn't any more Cy Young upside than Corbin Burnes. Because the velocity's back, but it's just the fact that cutter isn't super duper good anymore. So now you're giving super premium money for a guy that probably won't win a Cy Young award for a lot of years with a lot of risk, because every single pitcher's contract has tons of risks. I don't know. It's a weird spot for him to be, as I'm sure he went into the free agency being like, this is perfect. Like, I'm the guy. And now Fried and Snell got their monster deals. He's like, what the hell? But
might have forced the hand a little too much.
Might have been a little too excited, but I'm maybe there's a world where Corbin Burnes signs a prove-it deal and he strikes out 34% of batters again, and next year he gets the monster deal. Like, oh, strikeout rate's back up, guys. Look at me. Kind of like Blake Snell just did.
After he won the World Series with the Mets. That'd be amazing.
Exactly. after he holds the trophy. And that is the thing, like being able to be like, we have a number one. We can go into a playoff series with a guy. Because if it's not Corbin Burnes, I don't know. Hopefully the Mets make the playoffs. Like, I don't know who pitch game one for them as they get to a possible postseason series, if they get
Brandon
the roster
Sproat
they currently have. Hopefully, I mean maybe, but there's a long way to go there too. There's no player available that raises the Mets 2025 ceiling more than Corbin Burnes. So that's why I find myself more intrigued by him. But it's more of just like a really solid dude than like this is a true top of the league pitcher anymore.
I agree with you, and I think as Burns continues to grade out, he will show more and more signs of that. I don't want to lump them as too much of the same because they do have their differences, but especially throughout the peak years of the beginning and the buildup of Kevin Gausman, he was one of those where I looked at and I said, okay, as he gets into his early and then soon to be mid 30s, you're going to see continued regression, and we have to an extent where Gausman's good, but he's not a guy that, was deemed a couple years ago in the free agent market as like this ace caliber pitcher. I see that with Burns as well. If you invest long term in him, I think you're getting another 2 years of ace caliber pitching, where he's going to show those peaks. But then I think after that, you're going to see a lot more reality where, in essence, it might look like an overpay, or maybe actually I shouldn't even say that because with this market, who the hell knows? It might be a drastic underpay from a couple years from now because we're going to see a guy get $1 billion over the next decade. I'm so confident in that. I know that Mark was like, "There's no chance." I'm like, "Buddy, we're already at $800+ million. We just jumped also from Mike Trout to what is the total value of his contract again? Do you have an idea, Jay? Of Mike Trout's.
Of Mike Trout's, I think it was 530 something like that. I'll check right now for you.
Okay, so let's say a 530 to 550 range. Then we go to
427 actually.
Okay, so 427 for Trout. Then we jump insanely there from 427 all the way. And oh no, James, what happened? Oh, okay, all right, you're good. All right, we're putting you back on the stream now. But yeah, so that happens, and I lost my complete train of thought. Where were we? I got completely.
You're talking about Mike Trout to jumping up to $1 billion.
Thank you. So we went from Mike Trout to then Shohei Ohtani, who a lot of people, including myself, thought that $600 million was insane enough. Then he gets $700 million, deferred payments and all. Now Soto, no deferred payments, $800 million. Should again the Mets void the opt-out after the 5th year, and I'm more than likely assuming that they will. I foresee this continuing to skyrocket unless we have a major cap by the time we get to the next players union, that entire ordeal between the union there and the ownership. So maybe when it comes to that in the next couple of years, that could prevent that from happening. I know they're going to go scorched earth in certain areas to try to just milk every single dollar that they can continue out of guys like Steve and out of the Dodgers and everyone else. But to put a cap on it with Burns, no, I think short-term high AAV, and this is a realm that he genuinely considers because the market there just isn't for him. The Mets have to do everything to pounce. And that's where I will be heavily looking at David Stearns because the Mets don't show any reported heavy interest at that point, and we come to find out that they were really never even involved. Say Burns signs 3 years, $45 million AAV with the contender not named the Mets, and we find out the Mets were really on the outside looking in by a lot. I think that tells you all you need to know on what David Stearns knows Corbin Burns as during his time in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. I think kind of no matter what the Mets wind up doing with Corbin Burns, it seems like there's so little interest. It's not even funny. It's just I know that he knows better because he worked with him for longer than anybody else in baseball really has. So I think that's a key thing here. I think that there could be things that never makes it up to us fans about, and not trying to say anything bad about Corbin Burns, but just about, I don't know, there's definitely some pitchers in the league who are still probably more from the old guard where they probably don't like these things that we talked about at the top of the show about individualized pitch designs and pitch plans and game planning stuff. I know when Madison Bumgarner went to the Diamondbacks, I heard a story that his catcher, he used to tell the pitching coaches, no, I'm doing my own game planning. I don't like any of this analytics stuff.
Oh, he's always such a stubborn SOB. Yeah.
So apparently the Diamondbacks pitching coaches used to go directly to the catchers and give them Bumgarner's game plans because he would never say anything to his catcher. So they would give their personalized game plans to the catcher and let Bumgarner do it in secret. No, they would never actually tell him. So you just don't know what these guys are like behind the scenes and what their day-to-day work ethic is like. And I'm not saying that Corbin Burns is bad, but I am just saying that I trust David Stearns with dealing with Corbin Burns more than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. Because unless you are an exec in the Orioles franchise, in which they're not bringing back Burns, and I thought that there would be a more emphasis on spending for an Orioles team under new ownership. That's something that we really haven't seen, at least this offseason yet, too much. I'm curious how much that'll change as the offseason goes for them. But in the case of Burns and what his market is shaping out to be, Yeah, you just have to wonder those things when Stearns has really put himself in a position far more knowledgeable and far greater of an understanding with Burns than others, as we've alluded to. So, James, before we kind of wrap up the show, because the Knicks game started 5 minutes ago, so priorities, we got to speed this one up. I'm going to get to some donations quick, and then we'll get to a comment or two, and then we'll wrap everything up. And again, thank you guys so much to everyone that's been chiming in live on our replay. If you haven't already, make sure to smash a like and subscribe on. It really does mean a lot. Let's see. Yankees are getting the first in-person interview for getting these little details. Already, everyone got a Zoom interview with Sasaki. Yankees are getting the first in-person interview. I'm not exactly sure how true that is. Have we heard from like Jack Courier, someone that they got the first? Here's the thing. I also genuinely don't care if the Yankees have the first person interview or anything like that, because all we've learned from the Yankees the past couple, and I'm sure they had an interview with Yoshinobu Yamamoto before the Mets did. You know, I'm actually certain that happened, as a matter of fact, because I remember Yankees fans going bananas when it first started. That was reported that the Mets had their first meeting with him, and then we were doing it. It was the seesaw back and forth until we both looked like schmucks with him going to LA, and that being that. But let's get to a comment or two here. Tim Dog with a $5 holla says, Mets fans have to realize that Stearns is not going to operate in a rush. He's going to have the market come to him and do what he always does, 1,000%. He just has a lot more financial flexibility than ever. So instead of Stearns' biggest offseason acquisition being a guy that he traded for that has 3 years of control there in a sneaky move for the Brewers, now it's about signing the largest contract in North American sports history. Just a little bit of a difference. Yoshimo with the $2 holla says, Griffin Canning will be our new Trevor Williams. Now, anytime that we talk about a swingman type pitcher, Trevor Williams is the automatic deferment that comes to mind. And we haven't really fit that mold of a Trevor Williams pitcher, other than I'd say Jose Budo to a degree, Tyler McGill, and you know, little sample sizes, but no one has really mastered the ability to be a swingman, I think, as quality as Williams was, going back to like his 2021, 2022 seasons with the Mets. Is there anyone currently in the organization, maybe it's Griffin Canning himself, that you think could genuinely fit that type of role?
I think Budo still could fit that role as well.
Right.
I think that there's a chance that there could just be some prospect pitchers that we're not thinking about that can fit that role as well. Even just trying, I mean, I don't know, Tyler McGill could fit that role. Like, there's a lot of guys that can just kind of be these middling. Tyler McGill kind of fit that role last year, just kind of showing up when you need him to and being just good enough most of the time, sometimes, to be someone that doesn't make you want to throw up when you watch a Mets game, sometimes. So I think right now the Mets actually have almost too many of the guys in that role. This is an entire starting pitching staff right now of SP 6 and 7. Paul Blackburn, another guy, could very easily be the new Trevor Williams. Like, we have too many Trevor Williams right now. If we get any more Trevor Williams, I'll start to question it a little bit. But right now we have adequately like 4 to 5 Trevor Williams. I think it's a really good spot to be.
Yeah, and I feel this is in a lot of ways eerily reminiscent to last offseason where we were debating the same thing. We have so much depth. Awesome. Okay, when are we getting that ace? Doesn't really happen. It's Sevi Manaea, that's it. And then Kodai goes down because we all know this as Mets fans. You can't expect the year to start without your most talented pitcher on paper to go down with injury. If we go back to every single year that I've covered the Mets, as a matter of fact, that has held true. Whether it has been the continuation of Jacob deGrom going down to now Kodai Senga, it has been every single year. Our so-called ace has not been there for the past couple years. You got to hope and pray this is finally the year in 2025. I'd like to think that is, whether it's Senga or someone new that they acquire, like Luis Castillo would be a lot of fun. Obviously, Burns would be awesome, Sasaki among others, but I'm damn excited to looking forward to these moves. And James, my final question for you, and then we will get out of here, is the following. What do you think the next move from the Mets is going to be?
Oh, it's going to be a quadruple A pitcher, or a depth infielder, or something completely not fun at all. Like, it's going to be like how we just signed Jared Young a few days ago. Like, the next Mets move is going to be something that everybody moans and groans about 100%. There's no way the next
Jared
Mets
Young.
move is exciting. I'm sorry.
That's KBO legend, Jared Young, just like his teammate that the Mets signed and the Southpaw as well. So can you... Max Muncy was an Oakland A. I remember those days. And the Dodgers were like, we can fix him. And holy shit, did they fix him.
He was once a left-handed hitter with some power and okay plate discipline that had no position. And that was it. That's what Jared Young is.
There you go. You heard it here, folks. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is our latest edition of Big Mets Update segment. James, was a pleasure to have you on. We'll definitely have you on. I'm thinking next time the Mets make a pitching move of significance, we'll have you on like the day later to hear your reaction and analysis on it. And maybe even Isaac, too. Maybe I'll lump you guys together and we'll do a trio. I think that'd be a lot of fun. So shout out to you, Isaac, if you're listening or watching this whenever you are. But guys, thank you so much again for watching. We really appreciate it. If you watch this on replay, let us know your thoughts down below. What is your biggest takeaway from all the players and all the reported rumors and reports in general that we broke down. That is James Shiano from the Mets Up podcast. You can check out James where exactly? Socials? Let him know.
Check me out on Twitter, James_Shiano. I also write for Roto World. I write pitching recaps and player recaps. There's a bunch of free agency recaps too. And then Messed Up Podcast YouTube, Messed Up Podcast Instagram, Messed Up Podcast Twitter, Spotify, Apple, wherever you want it, we're there.
Awesome. James, thank you so much for coming on.